Our sermon text for this morning is our gospel reading, which is taken from Matthew's account of Jesus' life, the 5th chapter. It's a famous passage. Out of reverence for the words of Jesus, I invite you to stand for the reading of the gospel. At the beginning of what is called the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus describes 8 characteristics that God blesses in those who trust and follow him. Now, when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
I'd like you all to be seated. So what is it that makes Christians different from people who don't follow Christ? I had an opportunity to really reflect on this when I was a freshman in college at WSU. There were 50 guys on my dorm floor, 5 of whom identified as Christians. I kind of got a hunch that maybe a few months earlier there would have been more than 5. But we were away at college, and what was interesting was one of those 5 had been randomly matched with a roommate who not only wasn't a Christian, he had never known a Christian. There were none in his family, there were none in his circle of friends, and the only things he knew about Christianity were things he had picked up off of television, largely television preachers. So you can imagine some of the ideas he had about what Christianity was really about. In fact, I was in a class sitting next to him once. It was an urban planning class, and the professor began the class by asking this question: if you had to come up with a system for identifying everyone on earth and locating every person out of all those billions, what would you do? And some students threw out various ideas, and then one guy raised his hand and he said, how about if each person had a unique barcode that was tattooed on their hand or something? And my friend turned to me and he said, the mark of the beast. And I said, oh yeah, that's it for sure. But what was interesting is it got me thinking, if you ask people what makes Christians different, what would they say? Would they say, well, Christians are people who go to church, which the 5 of us generally did. We were in college, by the way. But what if you can't go to church? What if your health prevents you, or the weather prevents you, or what if there's a pandemic, say? Does that mean you can't be a Christian? And isn't it possible there are people who go to church because of the social connections, or because somebody drags them there? That doesn't necessarily make them a Christian, right? And other people would say, well, Christians are goody-goody, they do good things, and that's generally true as well. But what if your health prevents you from doing good things? Or what if you're one of the people, I've met some people in the world that just surviving day to day takes all their energy, just fending for themselves or their family. Does that mean they can't be a Christian? And aren't there atheists also who have altruism, who are willing to do things for others? That isn't very unique. Some people say Christianity is a lifestyle. And we certainly have Christianese words and customs and, sacred music that's different and, all sorts of particular things about us. But I'm not sure that those are the defining characteristic either. Because what about the earliest Christians? They didn't have any of those things, right? They didn't even have Christian friends that were just kind of out there. I actually met a man once from Indonesia who had been converted to Christianity by a Bible that he had found and hidden under his mattress. His entire family and all his friends and his culture was roundly Muslim, but he had become a Christian. Is that possible to be a Christian without a Christian lifestyle? Well, in the text that we just heard, Jesus focuses on one of the things that I think is essential and essentially different about Christians, different from our human nature and different from the culture around us that I think we often forget about. And that is character. How different our character is called to be because we are followers of Jesus. We are called to be different people in what we value, how we think, how we act in response. And this morning, I want to go over those 8 characteristics. I think they're important. In fact, last year I read a great speech that was a commencement address, and it was interesting because it was delivered by a Roman Catholic bishop, Robert Barron, at a college that was founded by Free Will Baptists. So it was kind of roundly Christian. And the title of the address was The Most Important Decision in Life. And you know what he told these new graduates who were going out to take on the world was the most important decision that they would ever make in life? It was their character. As he put it, what kind of person will you be? What will your soul be like? Who will you worship with your life, with the way that you live? So I want to talk about what Jesus tells us at the beginning of this sermon, right off the bat. He starts out by saying, "Blessed are those who are poor," which would have had a gasp from his crowd, right? And I think today, even, is really countercultural because we don't think the poor are blessed. We think the poor are cursed and the rich are blessed because being rich has a lot of advantages, right? You could solve a lot of problems if you got the money. You can have more influence if you have the money. How can poorness be blessed? And then Jesus goes on and says the poor in spirit in Matthew's gospel. And again, this is so countercultural. Because I don't know about you, but in the high school I grew up in, we had spirit weeks. And we would get together in the gym and the different classes would chant, "We've got spirit, yes we do. We've got spirit, how about you?" And it was all to generate excitement about, an athletic contest that was ultimately about, getting a ball full of air through some kind of arbitrary target. But even if you lost, you could say, "We won the spirit prize," right? So what's Jesus talking about? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Well, he's not talking about a lack of enthusiasm. And he's not talking about poor self-esteem or poor self-image or self-hatred or anything like that. What he's talking about is humility. What he's talking about is not thinking so much of yourself that you don't recognize your daily, minute-to-minute need for God and his grace and his power. He says that's a blessing. That's something that you are lucky if you have that quality. That's something to work towards. Because the more we recognize, the more we accurately appraise our own strengths and recognize our need for God, the more we will see him working in our lives. The more he can do with our lives. In fact, Martin Luther once said, God creates out of nothing. Until a person becomes nothing, God can make nothing out of him. He didn't mean, again, that we have poor self-esteem. He meant that we recognize that compared to the one who created the universe, and our understanding of the universe keeps getting bigger and bigger, the one who developed the intricacies of life on our planet, the one who created beauty for our enjoyment. From that perspective, what do we have? Only what he gives us. Only what he has given us in creating us. The more we're poor in spirit, the more we recognize how much he loves us like children. Not for what we do or accomplish in life, but purely because we belong to him. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And then he goes on and says something equally baffling, I'm sure. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who are presently sorrowful, for they will be comforted. That's what God is about. He's not saying mourning or being sorrowful is a blessing. He's saying we're blessed in spite of that because God sent Christ into our world for the very purpose to provide comfort, provide a different future for us. That's what he's talking about. You know, when I was growing up and preparing to confirm my faith publicly before the congregation doing catechesis classes, as they called them, we had every week to memorize a new Bible verse. But here's the thing, we got to pick the Bible verse. So you know what the first one I memorized was? John 11:35. Jesus wept. Shortest verse in the Bible. But you know, it's not a bad verse to memorize. You know why? Because the context of that verse is that Jesus is at a funeral. He has come to the funeral of his friend Lazarus, and he sees his friends Mary and Martha, Lazarus' sisters, and they're grieving. They are weeping, and Jesus wept. He wept with them. Meaning, even though he knew he was about to raise Lazarus from the grave, he was grieved by the grief of his friends. And you know, even though we believe and we celebrate on All Saints' Day and throughout the year, really every Sunday, the fact that God has promised he will raise us and our loved ones from the dead, he still grieves with us when we hurt. He grieves the brokenness of this world and the brokenness of us and our relationships in it. And blessed are those who mourn with God, who are sorrowful over the things that makes God sorrowful. Because our hearts don't become callous. Because we don't become callous to the things of God, and we rely on the hope of what God has prepared for us in Jesus. He goes on to say, blessed are those who are powerless in society. The meek, it's often translated, for they will inherit the earth. He's not talking about being gutless. He's talking about being gentle. He's talking about submitting to God. He's talking about not forcing your way on other people. Not getting your way at the expense of others. He's talking about trusting God for vindication, rather than taking vengeance upon yourself. And why does he say the meek will inherit the earth? Well, notice the word inherit. You know, in this world, the meek generally lose out. The powerful will take what they can get from the meek. And this is true throughout the earth. But the earth ultimately belongs to God. The earth is the Lord's, for he made it, and someday God will reclaim it. And only the meek will inherit the earth. Only those who trust God for vindication. Renee and I just last year redid our wills, and we included a no contest clause. Anybody know what a no contest clause is? A no contest clause says that any of our heirs who contest the will lose. They lose their inheritance. If they're going to fight about it, they don't get their share. And you know, God's will has a no contest clause. It's only those who submit to God's will, who trust that God's will for us is better. His judgment is better than ours. That we can rely on him to give us what we really need and desire far beyond what we could grasp for ourselves. In other words, the meek will inherit the earth. Jesus says, blessed are those who are pursuing righteousness, like hunger and thirst, for they will be filled. You know, this last week was what I think is the ultimate kids' holiday, Halloween. Because they get to go out and get as much candy as they can. And the vegetable that represents Halloween, the pumpkin, they can stab that and set it on fire. It's a great holiday. And it kind of reminds me that, as adults too, we often pursue things that aren't necessarily the best for us. In fact, sometimes we pursue things that are downright poisonous to us, to our soul, if not to our body. But when we come to know God, when we come to appreciate His righteousness, just how right His will is for us, we start to change a bit. We start to hunger and thirst for things that are right, for righteous relationships, for resolving conflict and having good, pure relationships with each other, for righteous bodies that actually function the way God intended them to be, for a righteous world where there is absolute, perfect justice. And of course, when will these things be fulfilled? Well, they'll only ultimately be fulfilled by God. But Jesus celebrated whenever He ran across righteousness. Whenever He ran across somebody doing the right thing, He celebrated that. And you and I, who are His followers, we hunger and thirst for it. All the more because we can't perfectly fulfill that in ourselves. We look forward to the day when all things will be made right. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are practicing mercy, for they will be shown mercy." And how countercultural is this? I mean, we live in a Darwinian worldview, right? Survival of the fittest, the strong take from the weak. That is just kind of the way of the world. We're trained in competition, and we accept in many cases, whatever advantage you can get. Well, you're entitled to take that advantage, and our world is full of isolationism and people who want to end lives because they are inconvenient to them. And God's view, the divine view, is very different. God's view anticipates God's mercy. In other words, God has mercy on us because He loves us. Not because we're deserving, not because we're strong, but again, because we're poor in spirit. And those who understand the mercy of God tend to be more merciful to others. When we understand that God is merciful to us because He loves us, not because we deserve it, we can even be merciful to others whether they deserve it in our opinion or not. And it's no coincidence that so many hospitals start with the word saint, right? St. Luke's, St. Alphonsus, right? Holy Family, Sacred Heart, Deaconess Hospital. My daughter was born at Missouri Baptist Medical Center. There are even some Lutheran hospitals, believe it or not. Why is that? It's not a coincidence. It's because the merciful, those who know that they have received God's mercy, tend to be merciful to others. Because we know that God is sensitive to our pain, we are sensitive to other people's pain. That is part of our character. Jesus says, "Blessed are those who are pure in heart, for they will see God." The way the world sees God is not quite the way that the Bible presents Him. I'm thinking of a lot of the cartoons of God. I remember seeing one where God was looking down through some kind of scope at Earth, and He had this huge smite button next to Him that He was about to hit. Well, that's how some people see God. I saw one cartoon where God was on a game show, and he was next to this little skinny guy, the big old man, and the announcer was saying, "That's right, that's another 100 points for God. Looks like you've gone over the 1 billion point level, and doesn't look like Ed's got any points on the board yet." We think that God, in His greatness is just playing with us. But that's not what the Bible presents. It presents God as being without sin. God as being pure in heart. God as not pursuing self-interest, but in fact sending Jesus into our world for us. Completely for us. And only those who are pure in heart, who appreciate the value of sinlessness and selflessness, can actually see God, can actually see how God really works in the world. Blessed are those who are pure in heart, and blessed are those who are peacemaking, for they will be called sons of God. God's purpose in sending Jesus was reconciliation. It was to make peace with us, because we couldn't make peace with Him. We had nothing to bargain with. But He sent Jesus to sacrifice himself for us in order to win us back. Because God doesn't force us to do anything. He could have. Jesus could have called down legions of angels. He could have wiped out the Roman army. He could have forced everybody to obey his will, and we would have loved him. Not at all. But he wants a relationship with us of love and of peace. And only those who pursue peacemaking, not troublemaking, not forcing their way on other people, but only people who imitate God as peacemakers can be called children of God. And finally, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted unjustly, for theirs is the reign of heaven." Notice, he's not saying persecution is good any more than sorrow in and of itself is good. And you can be persecuted for being a jerk. You can be persecuted for being obnoxious. There's no value in that. This is being persecuted unjustly. That is, being persecuted for doing the right thing. Being persecuted for doing the things of God. And that's blessed. Why? Because ours is the kingdom of heaven. Because God, the King of all, if he's our King, he's given us a share in his kingdom. Not just as servants, but as his children. And this is the character of Jesus. All 8 of these traits, aren't they? You read through the rest of the Gospels and you discover that Jesus was supremely humble. And that he grieved over brokenness and sin in the world. And he was meek. He didn't force himself on anyone. And he was also righteous. He celebrated anything that was made right. And he was merciful. And he was pure in heart. And he was peacemaking. And on the cross, he was persecuted unjustly. And in order to present the character of God to the world, his followers are called to take on the same character through the power of the Holy Spirit. You know, one of the interesting things over the course of that year in which I got to see these 2 friends of mine, both friends, kind of work out their relationship as roommates, one a Christian and the other trying to figure Christianity out, was that they influenced each other. Because the one who was a Christian came to realize that his faith had to be lived out pretty much every moment of every day because his roommate saw it. And his roommate was judging the Christian message based on his character. And of course, the other one who was trying to learn about Christianity discovered that it wasn't a matter of just television preachers or head knowledge. That Christianity had to do with a relationship with Christ that shapes our character. Not that we're perfect, but that we belong to him. And this element, character, is essential. It's essential that we are different so that other people can know the truth of God's love for them and his plan for the world in Jesus